Okay, then let's get started. Hello and welcome to this Tech Talk. My topic today is about SPA without API, and what's behind this I will try to explain today within the next about 20 to 30 minutes. So first of all, let's introduce myself shortly. I am Jürgen Ratzenböck. I am the head of technology at jobs.at. So this means I am responsible for everything regarding the software development at jobs.at. And I am reachable via email, Twitter, or GitHub. So if you have any questions or you want to get in touch with me, just drop me a line there, and looking forward to that. So my main topics at work are full stack web development. So I am mainly focused on PHP stuff. So we work a lot with the Laravel ecosystem. And on the front-end side, Vue.js is the main technology we use from the JavaScript world. So that's where I'm also quite deep into. So before we dive into the topic, a few words about jobs.at, who we are and what our mission is. So jobs.at is a fast-growing team. So I actually changed this in contrast to the last time when I was here, because we are not that small anymore. We are now over 20 people already. We are situated in Linz, so we have an office there, but we are also quite flexible with home office, and we are very excited that soon we will move into we will open an additional office in Vienna. So, because we have some colleagues already sitting in Vienna, that's quite cool what is coming up there. So what do? We build a fast and intuitive job platform for our job seekers. So we really try to make everything performance optimized and to make it very simple for the job seekers to browse through a variety of jobs and also apply with an easy process there. And what also makes us some kind of unique is that we have a very fair and transparent billing model for our customers, because we are one of few players who use basically a pay-per-click model instead of these fixed price amounts for job ads where you need to pay upfront a fixed amount, and performance does not play that much of a role. So we really only bill you when you get performance. And our inventory is quite large. So we have right now around 70,000 jobs, and we have 830,000 sessions per month. Of course, this varies a bit, but as you can see, it's quite a lot, and we are definitely one of the performers and more popular websites in Austria, or job platforms in Austria. Okay, with that, I want to go straight to the topic of today. So SPA and API. First of all, I would like to get everyone on the same page and shortly go through those topics that we have a common understanding. So SPAs are around for quite some years. They are very popular due to these client-side rendering frameworks like Vue.js, React, or Angular. So basically they are characterized with just a single HTML page, which is then your entry point. It usually contains no app-specific content at all. So the server just provides this one HTML page, then the framework, whatever you use, boots up, and then the heavy lifting, as I call it, is basically done on the client side. So the client is very rich, but of course it needs to get some data from somewhere. So there are then REST APIs traditionally in place, or nowadays also most often already GraphQL things, and they talk to some server or some API in the background, and you can use different technologies there as well. So popular ones are Node.js, for instance, if you're the JavaScript world, or if you're more into PHP like we are, you can use Laravel as well to build your API. or even Firebase. If you if you don't have backend resources at all, you can even go more into the backend as a service direction. This is also quite common nowadays. And on the other hand, we have, as I said, so the server is often quite dumb, more or less. So it just provides CRUD activity for the resources. So to create, read, update, and delete certain API resources which are needed on the front end. And they are usually communicated via JSON payloads. So there is no HTML going back and forth anymore, but you basically do XHR requests only and basically exchange JSON. So this is a wrap up what single page applications are and how they work. And everyone for years is now telling when you do modern web development, you have to do SPAs and they're so cool and so on. But I think it makes sense to also think about why you even want to consider this approach, because there are also frameworks like Laravel or Spring Boot or whatever. They provide a rich ecosystem to do server-side rendered apps. So why would you want to do SPAs? First of all, you have this no page refresh by default, which means that as all the interactive stuff is happening on the client side and there are only JSON fetched from the server, you can decide to only update a portion of your website and not like in a traditional server rendered app where you basically submit the form, then you do some redirect, and then a new page refreshes. So this is quite nice because it also provides a more fast and smooth app-like UX. So as you know it from native mobile apps, for instance, and with all these progressive web app enhancements, this even can go to the next level where you have things like add to home screen or even offline support with service workers. So this is quite powerful. What I also consider as a really cool thing is that with all these front-end frameworks, the developer experience is really great. So if you don't use them, you have not that much structure with JavaScript. You have to do the DOM manipulation on your own. And with these frameworks, everything can be set up really structured, and you have this reactivity things going on, and it's just nice and scales very well. Fourth point is that if you have a RESTful API in place, you can also easily extend it with multiple client applications using this API. So you can have, in addition to your web app, you can have a mobile app. And this is quite nice if you have this separate REST API. And last but not least, as I already said, the backend gets very simple usually. So it's more or less just a data provider. And you have also serverless possibilities nowadays with Lambda functions, for instance, where you don't even need to host your own backend instance. So if you're more in the front-end development part, it's definitely quite nice. But there are also some challenges you have to think about when using this approach. And also maybe some disadvantages. First of all, you have two separate repositories usually to maintain because your API gets your own project, and this shouldn't be a big problem, but yeah, you just have to take care of that. What I think also might be a disadvantage is that the initial page load with SPAs is slower because if you think about it, the server first has to fetch the HTML page, then the JavaScript is downloaded, and then we have to do a JSON request or an XHR request to get the data, and then the client-side framework can render something. So there are two requests going back and forth, and that's why the SPAs nowadays, like if you do Vue, you have the possibility with server-side rendering as well to overcome this problem so that the first request gets the full HTML response back, and only then it turns into an SPA. The HTTP communication overhead, you have to consider as well. So there is a lot of communication going back and forth. Also might not be that much of a problem if you have powerful web servers and so on, but still. Then the building and the deployment setup is definitely more effort, because you want to have continuous integration for both things, like the front end and the API. And there are also things you don't even consider in the beginning, but they are still some effort to do, like how do you do authentication? Because if you have an API, then you usually need to have something like JWT, so the web tokens in place. You usually don't do session authentication like you would have it in a server rendered app. Then you have hosted it probably under a different subdomain, so you need to consider CORS and content security policy, that everything works there correctly. So there are some little things you have to take care of when setting up your API. And this might be more effort than just having your monorepo, more or less, with the full website. And the last point, which is also worth to mention, is that SEO could be a big problem if you really render everything on the client, because the Googlebot still does not rely, or you cannot really rely that it executes JavaScript always. So that might be a problem if you really want to SEO optimize your web page. Then it should be also working without JavaScript. All right, so with all that knowledge in place, I want to now explain what our project was and our thoughts, and to which solution we finally got. So our starting point was that jobs.at, the front end, as you know it when you visit the website, is a classical Laravel app. So it has a database behind it, it has controllers, routes, and so on. So everything is rendered on the server. We have our template engine in place, and it's really performance optimized. So there are no third-party JavaScript frameworks, because of course they would slow down things a bit. And it's accessible for everyone without login, basically. But of course there are certain functionality, like the job alarm, for instance, when you want to have, or you want to like jobs, you need some kind of user profile. And this was implemented very rudimentary. So it's just basically the login, and you could manage your personal data, but there was nothing else. And now our project was to start enhancing this profile more and more, to also have things like document management, where you can upload your CV or your certificates, and you can use them then in the application process. So this is the first project we have right now, but the user profile will grow over the next few months and years, I guess. So this we have to consider as well. And it should be highly mobile optimized, because we know from our analytics that most of our users are on the mobile phone and they want to apply when they are on the bus or wherever, and that should be easy. And what we also identified is, while for the rest of jobs.at, SEO is a major thing, for this part it's not important, or basically irrelevant, because this is behind the login, so Google does not need to index those pages. So this was also a point we took into place in our thoughts here. And what we wanted to achieve now is, since we have this user profile with authentication already via our Laravel app, with typical session authentication you get out of the box, we wanted to use those parts, but we also wanted to build up this user profile as kind of web app within the app. So we wanted to have the single page application experience. We wanted to have a great developer experience to maintain this over a longer time and extend it. So vanilla JavaScript was not our favorite thing here. So the best for us would be to use Vue.js, because we already knew the framework from a different product. And this was our goal, to basically, on the one hand, use a front-end framework, but also do not change too much in the backend, no heavy refactoring up front, because as you know, time and resources are always limited in software development. So we tried to get started very quickly. So the question was, what should we do to combine our existing Laravel app with some kind of single page application capability? And luckily, there is a really cool thing in the Laravel ecosystem, which is called Inertia.js. And this is not a framework on its own, but rather it works with existing frameworks. So it's kind of an adapter or a glue, more or less, which brings your backend and frontend together in an intelligent way, that you don't have to do all those client-side routing, state management, which you usually have to do with SPAs in the front end on your own. And you can use the existing server-side routing, for instance. And they also have this citation on their webpage, building single-page apps without building an API. And this is basically what we wanted to do here, because we wanted to keep our monorepo and still have few components. So I want to explain how this Inertia works with an animated figure here. So if you consider your browser on the left-hand side and your server on the right, the typical flow starts by requesting some kind of HTML page. The server then responds with an HTML as well. And as you know it from SPAs, there is just this one root diff where the whole SPA basically gets injected into. The only special thing here is, what Inertia already does, is this data page attribute, which is added to this diff. And here it encodes in JSON format which view component it needs to render and which properties this component needs. Next step is that JavaScript gets downloaded and your Vue app boots up, and you have to do a bit of a tweak here to also boot up the Inertia app. And then Inertia knows, hey, there is this data page attribute. So I know now which Vue component you want to render, and then it basically does the switching or the rendering of the component itself. And from then on, it's really an SPA, more or less. So everything else you do normal XHR requests, with the only difference that there is this Inertia true header added to every request automatically. And with that, this is more or less the way that the server and the client know, hey, these are kind of Inertia requests and responses, and they have to do something with them. So the server now knows, okay, instead of returning now the JSON, I always return some kind of JSON with this structure. So where you specify again the component, the props, the URL, and there can be additional things like the asset version to also do cache busting and stuff like this. And this is now then transferred back again. And Inertia reads this and then knows, hey, okay, I need to render a new component. So it automatically more or less mimics the client-side routing you would have to do on your own, and switches the components. So that's why it re-renders only this portion. And the cool thing is that to do this response here on the server, it's basically everything stays the same. So you have your controller, you fetch data from the database like you do it in Laravel. And then the only difference is, instead of returning a view of your template engine, you return this Inertia response and pass the data, and that's it. And on the front end, you don't have to handle the things like you would do with Axios, for instance, promises and so on. You don't have to do this, because Inertia automatically reads these properties and then populates them with your Vue component. All right. And now I want to talk a bit about how this looks in code, so that you get a bit of a feeling there. So on the server side, you first have to install the adapter for Inertia. So this is the setup part. You need adapters on the server side and on the front end. So basically it's just a composer package in case of Laravel. And then to start everything, we have this add Inertia directive you place there where you want to have your SPA live, basically. And this add Inertia does basically the thing we saw on the slide earlier, to have this div with the data page attribute rendered. And the right-hand side, the snippet shows how such an inertia response is built up. So I hope this is a bit readable. So as I said, there is this controller endpoint, and this is actually really from our real app. So we do inertia render, and we pass the component we want to render, and then as a second parameter we pass the data. And this is exactly how then the properties are also matched in the view component. And as I said, so development of routes, controllers, the validation even you get out of the box with Laravel can stay the same, so we don't have to change anything there. And Inertia then, before returning the response, there is a middleware which then knows, hey, there is this inertia response, so I have to do things like handling the redirect correctly, take care of asset versioning. So for instance, if my version of the Webpack build has changed and is different to the one provided in the request, then it does not do a JSON response, but rather does a full page reload so that the assets are re-downloaded. And this is all handled by Inertia, and that's, I think, quite cool because it makes it much easier for you. And also things like when you redirect back to the page where you were, when you do a form request, and you have some validation errors, they are usually passed into the session. And in case of Inertia, this is also handled that it's automatically populated in your properties in the view component on the front end. All right, on the client side, after installing the adapter, which is a basic NPM package, there are adapters not only for Vue, I have to mention, there is also React and Svelte support from Inertia already, and they are also working on some kind of Angular. So this is quite, there are more possibilities there. After having this on the left-hand side, there is the setup for this Vue app, and there is not that much difference. The only thing which differs is that you have this create inertia function, and you have to tell Inertia where it finds the Vue components. So this is the resolve attribute here, where you get the name passed, and then you basically require the Vue, in this case within user pages. There all the Vue components live, and then Inertia just needs to, or then the Vue instance has to be created like you would do it normally and mounted into the root div. And on the right hand side, if you're a bit familiar with Vue, there is no difference at all. Basically, you have your typical Vue component with the template and with the script tag. And you have those properties we saw earlier. So we have the CV in this case, the documents and document types. They are passed from the server side to the front end. And the cool thing is, usually in a typical SPA or Vue app, you would have the created hook where you load the data with XHR, then you have to handle the promise, you have to handle the errors and so on. And you can omit this here because this is done by Inertia. All right, and then I wanted to show you a bit how it looks like when you work with Inertia more when you do like form requests, for instance. The first snippet shows that. So we have this $inertia global variable, and we have this post method where we pass the endpoint and we pass the form data. and then it does a normal post request. We can also hook into this callback functions. So on start, for instance, tells us, okay, the request has been fired. So I can start showing a loading indicator. When it has finished, I can remove the loading indicator again. And again, there is no extra work reacting to the promises, because this is done by Inertia. And on the server side, if you know Laravel, this is very familiar. It's a normal redirect like you would do it in a server-side rendered app. And we pass a success message here with the with function, which usually passes the data into the session, and then it can be accessed on the template. And here, when we do this redirect, the Inertia middleware takes over, sees, okay, this is an Inertia response, so I have to, instead of putting this into the session, I have to build up this data structure we saw before, and this is handled behind the scenes. So basically, the only difference is that you, actually, from the redirect, there is not any difference, because we have this profile.index route, which is the name of the route, and behind there is the profile component. And the third snippet on the bottom of the slide shows how we can access this success message and then render it in a toast message, for instance, or however you want to render it. This is then up to the front-end developer again. So we can access this $page global variable and then access the success message there. Okay, then we are nearly at the end of the talk. So I want to wrap up and want to give a bit of a takeaway message. So definitely for me, I have learned that it's not always a black and white decision between whether you do server rendered apps or full SPA with an API. There are possibilities to combine these differently, and Inertia.js is one possibility. You could, of course, also just have parts of your app with few components sprinkled and do something on the server and a bit on the client. But if you really want to have this SPA experience, I think Inertia is a really good fit. If you come from a server rendered app like with Laravel or Ruby on Rails, for instance, and you do not start from scratch, then I would consider using such an adapter. Then an API, building an API introduces some complexity, definitely. The things I mentioned before, you have to take care. So think about it twice if you do that, especially if you just want to develop a web app and this will be your only client for quite some time. It's quite easy to get started with Inertia. So that's also the feedback from my team. The learning curve is not that high, because it's really not that you have to learn a new framework on its own, but it's just a few things you have to adapt on front-end and back-end side. And if you have multiple clients, like a mobile app and maybe, I don't know, some Alexa skill or whatever, then probably the API is still the better thing, because as I said, Inertia really tries to have this monorepo and have this one web app. And if you have multiple clients, you need some kind of typical API the clients can talk to. So there it's definitely not a fit. Okay, then I am at the end of my talk, and thanks for listening. And there is part of a team on this slide, so I hope there are even more job experts to come, as mentioned here. And with that, thanks for listening and goodbye.